the Xbox. The first Xbox, which was aptly named Xbox, was released on November 15th, 2001. Almost 19 years ago to the day. Xbox was the second console released within the so-called sixth generation of video game consoles. Xbox ushered in the era of online console gaming with Xbox Live. It revolutionized the gaming industry and how games would be played from that point forward. Following the Xbox, we had the Xbox 360 released 4 years later in 2005. In 2013, the world was introduced to the arguably confusingly named Xbox One. We saw an incremental update to the Xbox One with the release of the Xbox One X in 2017, which brought us 4K console gaming. Welcome to the show. I'm here for the tech. Today, we're going to take a look at the brand new Xbox Series X. Stick around while we take a dive into a new generation of video games. It's finally here, the Xbox Series X. Since the name was revealed, I think most of us thought it sounded, well, confusing. However, we shouldn't be surprised at this point because Microsoft doesn't have the best track record to naming their consoles. Questionable naming aside, the Xbox Series X is without a doubt an incredibly powerful gaming console, boasting a custom 8-core AMD Zen 2 CPU running at 3.8 GHz, an RDNA 2 GPU pumping out a massive 12 teraflops of performance, 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 RAM, a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD drive, and a UHD Blu-ray disc drive. In terms of connectivity, the Series X has 3 Type A USB 3.2 ports, 1 in the front, 2 in the back, a gigabit Ethernet port, an HDMI 2.1 port, power jack, and a proprietary port for expanding that super fast NVMe storage. The system, while not huge like the PlayStation 5, is not tiny either. The tower is approximately 1 foot tall with a 6 by 6 inch footprint. Microsoft decided to go with the tower form factor so the system would effectively act like a chimney. A large fan sits on top of the internals of the system to suck all that hot air out into your living room. Early reports that the system runs hot are not accurate in my experience. Sure, it gets warm over the exhaust on top of the system, but that's what it's supposed to do. Despite this large fan, the system is incredibly quiet. Compare that to the PlayStation 4 Pro and its jet engine-like noise levels. The Xbox Series X is an incredibly capable machine with regards to performance. Games that are specifically released for the Series X are expected to hit a target of 4K 60 frames per second in HDR, with some games able to achieve 120 frames per second, albeit in likely a lower resolution like 1440p and even down to 1080p. Microsoft has stated that the machine is capable of 8K resolution. It remains to be seen if that dream is realized in any notable way. If you're like me, however, jumping from the Xbox One to a Series X, the difference will be night and day. There is a massive improvement in visuals and performance, both for Series X optimized games and backwards compatible games. Let's talk about the NVMe SSD, which is really a game changer for consoles, not just for vastly improving initial game load times and save game loads, but also for loading other areas of a game. In the past, games were optimized for playing from either a disc, for example, on the Xbox 360, or a standard hard drive on the Xbox One. The speed of these older storage devices is a major bottleneck for game developers, and they have to program their games with it in mind. Optimizations can improve the user experience, such as using in-game scenes to mask loading the next area, but also duplicating in-game assets on a hard drive to reduce the drive seek time when loading a new section. This new NVMe drive should vastly improve or even remove these bottlenecks and greatly improve the experience for the user. Asset duplication is no longer necessary as there is effectively no seek time on the drive. Not only will new area load times dramatically decrease, it could also mean smaller game sizes. So far with what I've seen though, games are still quite large, so it remains to be seen if developers really take advantage of these new features. I've done a handful of tests when it comes to game and system loading times compared to the original Xbox One. Needless to say that the speeds are dramatically improved in some cases, while being marginally improved in others. Any speed increase is welcome in my book though. For a more detailed analysis of loading times, the Digital Foundry channel has done some amazing work in this area. Check them out. storage can be expanded with a proprietary 1 terabyte memory card, priced at a jaw-dropping yet somewhat understandable $220. This memory card uses the same extremely fast NVMe technology where you can store your Xbox Series X games or your backwards compatible games. Alternatively, you can use a USB port to expand your storage. Plugging in an off-the-shelf hard drive or SSD will also allow you to store your Series X or backwards compatible games. However, only the latter playable directly from the drives. You have to copy the games back to the internal storage or the 1 terabyte memory card in order to play the Series X games. The USB drives just aren't able to offer the performance needed by these new games. The UI of Series X may look familiar to most of you that have ever used an Xbox One. Fundamentally, not much has changed going from one generation to the next, but we can say it's an evolutionary change. Most notably that the UI runs in native 4K. One of the standout new features, Quick Resume, is meant to take advantage of the new fast storage. Quick Resume allows you to quickly switch between games and get back into the action as fast as possible. In some instances, taking only a handful of seconds to jump between games. Surprisingly, the feature also works well in backwards compatible titles, even if they're stored on an external USB drive. I'm running an SSD in a USB 3.2 enclosure, so that probably helps, but I imagine the feature would work using a standard hard drive as well. I believe this is because the Quick Resume data is actually stored on the internal NVMe SSD. Xbox controllers have certainly changed over the years from the initial Xbox launch till today. We can see the evolutionary changes Microsoft has made from one generation to the next, and it's easy to see which features worked and were brought forward and which were left behind. It's plain to see that this generation is no different for the Series X controllers. Microsoft must have seen that the Xbox One controller was something that might have been difficult to improve on. When looking at the two controllers side by side, it may be tough to tell them apart at first glance. Upon closer inspection, we see that Microsoft has joined Sony in adding a share button to the controller, for those that care about such things. Also, there's a nice textured feel to the triggers of the Series X controller. The D-pad has changed a bit in that it feels more clicky than the Xbox One D-pad. There's also a USB-C port, instead of that awful micro USB port that was on the Xbox One controller. Overall, not a massive difference in my opinion though. Beyond that, we still have almost exactly the same overall design. The AA batteries, the thumbsticks, button placement, all very familiar, but that's certainly not a bad thing. We can't talk about the Series X without talking about the games. I mean, it's kind of the reason you get a game console, right? There are 31 Series X titles available at launch. This does include cross-platform and cross-generation titles though. Some of those titles were already available for the Xbox One, but received some Series X improvements to take advantage of the increased power, resolution, and storage speed. If you have a Game Pass subscription, 9 Series X titles will be available to you at launch. There is a notable lack of exclusive games during launch, but there are certainly some intriguing exclusive Series X games that will be released in the coming months. Backwards compatibility is a major feature for the Series X. This does not only include your library of Xbox One games, but also going all the way back to Xbox 360 and original Xbox. You should expect to be able to play all Xbox One titles that do not require Kinect, but the list of older Xbox games is going to be a lot more limited. It hasn't yet been confirmed, but it's likely that all the Xbox 360 and original Xbox games that were available on the Xbox One should be playable on the Series X as well. The Xbox Series X is certainly a compelling and powerful machine. The system is already incredibly impressive and will only get better with updates, and as game developers learn to optimize their games to take advantage of all that Series X has to offer. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, use that thumbs up button. If you didn't, thumbs down is there for you as well. Be sure to subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.